Time for Type 40. We're a Doctor Who podcast on the Fandom Podcast Network. On this show, we take an in-depth and closer look at this beloved television series, the spin-offs, the merchandise, and even the fandom itself. Doctor Who's gone from homegrown family favourite to international entertainment legend and shaped the landscape of science fiction and fantasy for well over 5 decades. Now step into our TARDIS. Share this journey together here with us on Type 40. Yes, happy times, happy places, happy memories. Welcome to the show. Type 40's soaking up the summer sun, sort of, with me, Dan Hadley, this afternoon. I'm your regular Type 40 pilot, Birmingham's king of the geeks and lifelong Doctor Who fan. Yeah, you could say I'm an OG. I lived that cliche back in the day, hiding behind the sofa. But if you're strictly 2020 and you're newer to the Whoniverse, well, that's okay too. You're up to speed already because there's no gatekeeping here, only conversation, fun and games, words, pictures, sights and sounds this time as we positively hurtle back through time and straight up the M6 to the Las Vegas of Great Britain at a very particular time in its history. But before we do all of that, I've got to check my packed lunch is packed. I left it to him, you see, my fellow veggie and the original Whonitic, Mr. Simon Horton. Welcome back.
Well, hello, Dan. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be back. Been a bit of a while, and still enjoying this wonderful coronavirus lockdown that we're all still going through. So,
well, it's been a while for us, but it's not been a while for them because of the miracle of time travel and all the rest of it. That's how it is. You've been okay, though?
Yes, still okay.
Drinking out of your Doctor Who mug as we speak, after your Whonitics mug. Yeah, British holidays, Simon, back in the day. They were sort of like tours of duty, really, weren't they, for the average 8-year-old?
Well, they were fabulous because back in the day, we never went on foreign holidays. I didn't get my first overseas holiday until I was 21, 22. So back in the day, we were very much a caravanning family. And so we went all over the UK in a caravan. So wet weekends in Wigan, that was us.
Yeah, spotting registration numbers and cheering as you passed every junction.
Yes.
Making memories and making history. That's a huge part of Doctor Who fandom, isn't it? And part of being a Doctor Who fan and how we sort of chart that and catalogue it really over the years. Generation upon generation of us now have been doing it. Imagine anybody crazy enough to try and make any sense of any of that at all. Who would do something like that? Well, we're going to find out today because we're joined by two guys that have valiantly stepped into the breach. We're going to illuminate now a rather wonderful project with them. We've got writer and researcher John Collier and designer, illustrator Alex Storer with us. Welcome, gentlemen. How are things?
Hi there.
Good afternoon, guys. How are we?
Fantastic. Because you've been involved in a very particular project for how long now? How long have you been working on whatever you've been working on?
How long has it been in my head, Dan? Probably, 35 years, I'd say.
35 years. Okay. You look like a very young man to have had been living with this itch unscratched for a long time.
Bless you. No, seriously, the exhibition in Blackpool closed in 1985, and that's what we're talking about today. It's our project related to that called Blackpool Remembered. And since that venue closed, I've had this dream, this desire, this passion to get some kind of chronicled record of what took place there from 1974 to 1985.
Sounds simple enough, doesn't it? Not ambitious at all, is it, Alex? How did you get involved in this?
I think my interest in it, I visited the exhibition. I only went in 1985 as an awestruck 7-year-old. I went to Iceland the same week, but it was one of those, it just had such a profound effect because at that point in life, I just sort of lived breathed and slept Doctor Who. I was just obsessed with the show. Still was in later years, but I think that I loved season 22, and that seeing the exhibition on the back of that was just like a dream come true. As I'm sure you can relate with the when you're a fan of anything, or I think especially Doctor Who, there are periods where you sort of dip out of it for a while and then rediscover it. And it was probably 10 years ago now when I decided to write up a little sort of memoir of my various convention experiences, early memories of the show, watching the show in the early 80s, how I discovered it, how I became obsessed with Daleks.
Sort of chronicle it, really.
Yeah, that was called Who, Where and When. Put out a few printed copies, which people like Galaxy 4 sold for me, but primarily I did it as a short free ebook download, which is still on my long defunct Who website. And part of that was including a memory about the Blackpool experience and what I could remember from that. It's looking back on it, I've learned more since then as I've seen more photos and the memories have sort of become more clear.
Sounds to me like this is very much a meeting of minds that was bound to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking the other day and we couldn't quite remember how we ended up in touch with each other. I think we'd probably conversed on Twitter a few times, and you'd got a copy of my little book, and I'd also had another project on go, which was to create a floor plan of what was on display in 1985, which has actually taken me 10 years to do, on and off, to get right. Because I did it 2011, I think it was, and I did it as good as I thought I could do it. And then years later, I realised that it wasn't quite right, and then a real picture of a floor plan turned up, and that changed everything. I think being in lockdown, you found a little bit more time for your interests and various things. And I pretty much lost touch with the world of Who in recent years. So it hadn't really been on my radar much recently until John materialised.
I think we're all nodding here because we can all relate to this already to some extent, how things go away and then come back, and then how the impetus for something, really quite a simple notion sometimes sort of dawns upon you, and then you think, oh, I could do this. Could I do that? Has anybody else done that? Would anybody else consider getting involved in something, pretty harebrained, and where it can go and where it can take us? I think, Simon, certainly your experiences in fandom, setting up local groups and everything like that, the same with me, various things I've done. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about, gentlemen, and a lot in common. Even outside of Doctor Who, we're probably all a very similar type of fan. But yeah, I'm going to sort of leave you with that for the time being. Try and recover a few more memories, Simon, just throw at the guys whilst I run through a couple of our fixed points, some Fandom Podcast Network essentials. Each and every edition of our show, past, present and future, is up on the Fandom Podcast Network's master feed at fpnet.podbean.com or fpnet on the Podbean app itself. The Fandom Podcast Network's also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and streaming on iHeartRadio. Whichever of those you're listening to us on, let us know what you think of it all through our social media presence at Instagram and Twitter. Type 40 Doctor Who, or go get yourself some daily Doctor Who goodness with our fearless companions in Type 40's lively Facebook group, a rolling scrapbook of opinions from fans of all generations there. There's links to all of it in the show notes. Come and find us and bring a flask and have a chat. Let's get deep into it now, because as far back as the mid-19th century, the Lancashire coastal town of Blackpool was becoming a major tourist destination in England, in Great Britain. And I think it's got a reputation that has kind of spread a little bit to other places in the world, particularly those where British TV and British movies might be consumed, might be viewed. British culture, Anglophiles out there. This is it. This is going to connect some dots for you, because Blackpool was this huge major tourist destination in England, mainly because it connected up to all the sort of major manufacturing industrial regions in the whole of the country, really, via railway originally and then by motorway. Images of it, they have been known to reduce grown adults to sort of quivering wrecks. The 7-8-year-olds they used to be with its tower, that landmark tower, and the ballroom. There's 3 rather stately piers there, and in time they added theme park. There's a zoo and this big seasonal festival they have called Blackpool Illuminations, which Doctor Who's also been part of too, where the entire town seems lit up. It must be a conservationist nightmare, however, whatever energy they burn through doing that, because that still goes on every year. But Blackpool was and is maybe somewhere where dreams came true. But in 1974, specifically April of 74, after Doctor Who itself had been scaring kids witless in the comfort of their own homes for nearly 11 years, it arrived in style in Blackpool when John Pertwee and Liz Sladen were present at the opening of the Doctor Who exhibition located on the central promenade, the Golden Mile, as they call it. Viewers of all ages swarmed this location, this sort of dark and cavernous exhibition for several years, for nearly 11 years, to see their most notorious tea time terrors up close, if mostly behind glass, and they'd get within inches of the TARDIS central console, while such as the Daleks sort of heckled them from the shadows. So it's little wonder that for children of that time who've cherished those memories, Simon, that they've stayed with us all, haven't they? Can you remember when you first heard there was a Doctor Who exhibition, Simon?
Can actually remember it, and as I said earlier, we were very much a caravanning family, and so we went all over the UK in our caravan. And so my parents used to get a caravan club magazine, and they used to have a listing in there of events around the country through the year that people in caravans could go to certain rallies and join in on. And I can still remember coming home from school the one day. I remember it distinctly. I remember coming home from school the one day and my mum saying she got the new Caravan Club magazine, and she said, "Did you know there's a Doctor Who exhibition?" And I was like, "No." And this would have been, I'm guessing this was probably around about 1977, so I would have been about 9 at the time. And so suddenly this whole world literally opened up in one sentence from my mum. I thought, what, a Doctor Who exhibition? What does that even mean? And she said, "You won't believe where it's on." And I said, "Okay, where is it?" She said, "It begins with B." Well, my first thought was Birmingham, because that's where I live. And she said, "No, yeah, but better than that, it's Blackpool, so we will take you there on holiday." Well, suddenly, as I say, my world exploded in this. Wow! It was the first time we were ever going to go to Blackpool, which we'd always wanted to go to as kids.
So, what year do you think this was?
This was, I'm pretty sure this was 77, maybe 78. So I would have been about 9 or 10. And so I can still remember that first year going to the exhibition and going, down those famous steps down into the depths of this catacomb under the shops. And it took us ages to find it, because the other thing that you don't necessarily realise is that you walk along the Golden Mile. Well, the Golden Mile is called a Golden Mile for a reason. It's long. And so, us as kids, we're walking up and down this Golden Mile trying to find this mythical Doctor Who exhibition. This is obviously in the days before the internet and sat-nav, where you just pop it in your iPhone. And we couldn't find the exhibition. And I still remember just getting my heart was racing. I was just so anxious to find this exhibition. And the Golden Mile is huge, and we just couldn't find it. And then, of course, we started looking down the side streets, and that was when my eyes obviously alighted on this, the TARDIS. I mean, it's really difficult now in the 21st century, where the internet gives you access to everything.
Yeah,
to think back Maps, to those days when you had, it's not just that, but the fact that you had nothing. There was nothing for Doctor Who fans apart from this was in the days before even the weekly. So all you got was the Target books. That was it. Dennis Fisher figures, I think, would have just about come out around about the time. Yeah. There was nothing. So to suddenly see a TARDIS sitting on a pavement,
three-dimensionally,
literally, it's difficult to express to somebody who wasn't from that era.
It's almost exactly the same story. We've never spoken about this.
No, we haven't.
But it's almost exactly the same for me. And the first time apart from the Caravanning Club, the first time I became aware of it was seeing a slide at the end of Doctor Who. One of these sort of slides that the BBC used to put up like a continuity announcement, which is a blank slide with just a Doctor Who logo on with the word exhibition or something underneath. And it's, you can visit this at Blackpool on this, in the general location. Like I say, it was only ever the general locations. It was once you get there, you're on your own. That was the attitude from the BBC, I think. But we're far, far from alone. There are thousands of Doctor Who fans who could probably recount similar versions from whichever direction that they came in. But Alex and John, you've taken on the job of sort of transporting us all back there en masse, haven't you? Are either of you actually from Blackpool, John? And what have you created here and why?
Well, it's really interesting you said there about traditional seaside town of Blackpool, because for me and my family, that's what it was. You know, my mum and dad worked in the pot banks in Stoke-on-Trent. The pot banks used to shut down for 2 weeks every year for Potter's Fortnight. My grandparents similarly had done that before. All they ever knew was Blackpool. I was born in 1969, and I remember that's all the place I ever went to were Blackpool or Rhyl until the age of 16 when I went to Greece for the first time and went abroad. But I must have come across it in about 75, I think, 1975. So it had been open a year. I was already obsessed with John Pertwee, scared to death of giant spiders. And my granddad, we found it, we came across it, and he said, I'm going to take you into this Doctor Who exhibition. Music was playing outside, the theme music, as it always was, on repeat, on a loop. He paid for us to go in. We stepped inside, and there, lo and behold, above the ceiling, just before you go down the stairs, was a giant spider. So I ran completely in the opposite direction and never went in that year. And it took another 12 months before I actually went down those steps. But I was lucky as well because my uncle actually owned a B&B in Blackpool, and then later on the Lindale Cafe, which is just around the corner from the exhibition. So growing up in the 70s, it wasn't just an annual holiday. We'd go up for day trips. I'd stay over at my uncle's. And so, knowing, sleeping at my uncle's in the bedroom above the cafe, knowing that I could just about see the corner of the exhibition through the bedroom window at night as the tower was lit up, was just magical. I just, I couldn't get enough of the place, like many, many thousands of other fans. Incredible.
I've just sort of sensed, Jedi-like, a swarm, multiple envy from everybody listening to this show at the same time there. Just to be that close to it all the time. I'm sure I went in that cafeteria. Does that ring any bells with you? You remember any of that?
I'm sure I must have gone in the cafe at some point.
So, Alex, you're a little bit younger. Was it a similar story for you with the exhibition?
Absolutely. I mean, again, we were a caravanning holiday family in the 80s. Growing up in northeast Derbyshire, we could radiate to quite a number of places, and so that sort of thing, it was always a caravan holiday back then, and that would change.
Did you have to leverage your parents to go to Blackpool? Was this?
I don't think they had a say in the matter. The first time I became aware of the exhibition, I think, was when at the end of Revelation of the Daleks, when they flashed up the logo on the screen saying exhibition, and I think that would have been, Mum, Dad, we're going. A trip to Blackpool was hastily arranged for some point that summer. I can't remember the dates. I've tried to track down. There's no dates on the back of my photo prints or anything. And my mum would probably dress me in a parka coat at any time of the year. So you can see I've got a hood and everything. I'm wrapped up like I'm going to the Arctic. And clearly,
it's only wires in Blackpool, isn't it?
It could have been Easter. It could have been the summer, but obviously it was in the immediate period following that announcement. So yeah. We probably went to the exhibition on the first available day, and again, I insisted they take me back for a second visit later in the week.
I've been able to narrow down. I went twice, and I've been able to narrow down to the week when I went the first time. So I've worked it out that it was around August the 9th in 1978. And the reason why I know this, I mean, you just talking about that, Alex. I remember it was bitterly cold. I remember because we were staying at the Castle Hotel, which is not far from there. And I remember the wind sort of blowing outside the window, because it was before. I don't think there'd been double glazing in the hotel windows then. Not a chance at 78. No. So I remember it being like really cold and the wind being really, really loud. And so we had to spend quite a lot of time in. But there was a little newsagent opposite the castle, and my mother went out to get me some comics to sort of keep me amused, because we couldn't go out for whatever day it was, because there was basically a storm on. And she came back with a copy of, not Doctor Who Weekly, because it wasn't out yet, but of Star Wars Weekly. And because I've still got that comic, I can therefore narrow it down by a process of elimination that it was mid-August 1978 when I was there. So that was the first of my two visits. I'll tell you some more about that a little bit later on. But the memories, they sort of trickle through after a period of time. You sit down, as you say, it's sort of like taking the lid off a box of memories, and it's linked to all these other things, the sights and the sounds and other things that were going on on in your life. But you said earlier on, John, that this book that you've put together, that has been with you for 3.5 decades. So you'd still have been very young when you were thinking about this. So you wanted to create the ultimate book on the Blackpool exhibition. There were 2 exhibitions at the time, weren't there? There was one in Blackpool, one in Longleat. So yeah, you've had this idea for a long time. Why now to bring it into actual being, and what was the process that it went through?
I think it's been 35 years simply because when I had that holiday in Greece in 1985, it meant I didn't go to Blackpool. And in 1986, it wasn't there anymore.
Oh, no.
And that was, and it was unannounced as well. The closure was unannounced. We talk about this in the book. But so not having a final visit and being able to really take it in has stayed with me. It's weird. But the special memories I've got, that sort of glow I get inside, that warm glow inside, thinking about the place, is what inspired the project. And it's been a seed which during this lockdown has actually just come to fruition. It's been through Alex's support, because Alex is a brilliant nagger and he's been getting on at me and badgering me and looking at stuff I'm sending him every single day. And we've now got to the point where it's over 300 pages and over 70 people that are contributing to the project. We've tapped into something, and it's become a monster, and it's wonderful because it's full of photographs and stories and memories, lots of similar memories to the ones we've already been talking about today. But, just to see the pictures from 1974 right through to 1985. Interestingly, I went in 75, Alex went 10 years later in 85. We've almost bookended the exhibition history, really, between our visits. And we mopped up everything in between. And people have just been so generous, I think. If it wasn't for our exhibition army, which is what we've started calling them, there would be no book, there'd be no project, because we put out the call and then we literally couldn't stop the floodgates. I've had an email this morning, another piece has arrived. And so just adding it in bit by bit, the jigsaw has come together and we are able to really celebrate and pay tribute to what was an incredibly happy time.
So is the backbone of it written by yourself and a general...
We're aware that Telos have recently published Bedwy's book, which is much more, goes into the kind of their history in, I would say, probably a bit more detail than we do. We go through each year, but it's very much an illustrated scrapbook version of what it was like to be there. So we've got 5 sections. One of them is all about that history. We've got another that focuses on the Daleks and the Daleks that were on display there and what became of them afterwards. There's a whole section on the shop, because you can't talk about the Blackpool exhibition without talking about the shop. It was a very, Simon's nodding, very, very special place where you could actually buy merchandise related to the show. And then our final section, which is is very reflective, and it catches up with people who worked there, fans who went there. Yeah. Some quite moving stories, actually, about people's memories. I mean, it's moved me to tears, some of the things that people have been sharing. There's also a little bit of a catch-up on where some of those props have gone since 1985. So we're hoping it's a real spectrum of
and to encapsulate memories. An extra, that final visit that you never got, it's like an extra visit, a revisit of the exhibition within those 300 pages. So integral part to that, even with pictures, people's photographs, You've still only got sort of certain piece of the puzzle, haven't you? And that's, I suppose, where you came in, Alex, to really flood it with colour and with extra energy, and to make it sort of leap off the page, either a printed page or a virtual page. It's the same thing in principle, isn't it, as a designer?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think we would love to have this as a sort of a lavish coffee table style, but that was never John's idea. And I think it's a really admirable project to be putting this together as a free book, and it's just the sort of project that I've always been keen on being involved in. And it's been great for me as well, because obviously I never saw any of the other years, so I've been able to sort of visit it virtually through the various fan recollections and all these amazing photographs that have come in. There's one fan in particular who'd sent hundreds, literally hundreds of photographs, and they look like they were taken yesterday. The quality's fantastic, and it just brings back the smell of the place, that sort of musty aroma of latex and fiberglass, and probably a bit of damp.
So between you, Alex, obviously you've created some special bespoke illustrations for the book, haven't you? But how did you have to work very closely with John about who decided which photos made it into the book, and which didn't. The mix between the years, was that something you came to between the two of you?
It's mainly John's sort of baby. I've left the decision to him as to what's going in there, but I think we were talking about it because originally John contacted me to say, can I reuse your piece from my Who, When and Where book? And I think I said, well, yeah, but let me rewrite it for you because I can do a much better job now. So I rewrote it, and then that led to me writing another contribution, and I think I've done 2 more since then. And at some point we were talking about the front cover, and because I work as a freelance artist, I specialise in science fiction art and work with a lot of authors and do book covers. So that's really my thing. So I said, I'd be really happy to do you a cover for this book if you wanted. And then I think from the conversation that went on there, it was, well, maybe we could give each section a sort of a dividing page that would be an illustration relevant to that piece. So it sort of gradually evolved. There was no real plan. It just sort of one idea went to another. And for me, I decided to go down a sort of a comic book, graphic novel style type of illustration with line art, which is something I used to do. I spent my childhood drawing comics and Doctor Who comics and Daleks and all the rest of it. But in later years, it's a style that I haven't touched in a long, long time. So it was really fun to get back to doing that sort of thing. It's like going back to your roots. I haven't drawn a Dalek for over 10 years. I don't think I've drawn a Sideman since the 80s. So it's been really good fun, but also trying to think back to the exhibition, channel those memories, think, okay, what colours did it bring? Or what everything was sort of lit in reds and greens and blues. So there's a very distinctive colour palette that I think has given this suite of images a real nice identity for the book.
Lurid. I think lurid would be a good description for the colour palette of the old exhibitions. I mean, that's something, as we're talking now, that's the sort of impression that it's reminding me of. And one of the reasons why I think it's great that you're doing this book is because the memories of both the Blackpool and the Longleat exhibition, and actually for me, the Longleat exhibition is more personal because that's the one that I ended up going to more than Blackpool. But the memories of all of that are still literally burnt in my mind. But they're obviously diminishing as time goes on. Those memories do diminish, and so to have something like what you guys are putting together, I just think is fantastic. Because for me personally, I think probably for a lot of Doctor Who fans, the exhibitions are one of the most important parts of Doctor Who growing up for me. They're just as important as the episodes at the time. People always say, oh, if you could get in a TARDIS, where would you go back to? Well, my first answer would always be I'd go back to one of those exhibitions, because I would give anything to step inside one of those 2 exhibitions now, and as you're saying, Alex, smell those smells, because you're right, I can remember the smell. It was distinct. The sound design, the Dalek telling you that smoke was a bit exterminated.
Did it smell of dry ice and things like that, or is that just my memory playing tricks on me? Oh, it did? Okay.
It's a similar sort of smell, yeah.
I was going to say, I don't think it was dry ice. There was no dry ice in there.
I remember.
But it had that sort of slightly chemically kind of smell, and I'm guessing maybe in hindsight was that
kind of Raid.
Was it the latex that made that? I'm guessing, and the warm lights that were warming them up and stuff like that. So all of that stuff, it's a very heady brew. Those exhibitions are a very heady brew, and as John says, the shop. It's like I said earlier, it's impossible for anybody that wasn't there at the time to quite grasp how important these exhibitions were to a Doctor Who fan. This book is going to be brilliant, at least for us lot, for our generation to remember them, but for other generations that weren't there to get some sort of feeling of what it was like at that time.
Especially because, when you think about it, how many TV shows have had their own exhibition that have lasted for that long? I mean, I never made it to Llangollen, I never made it to Longleat, so my memory is just the Blackpool one, which is perhaps why it's so so important. But I think, what other shows had exhibitions that lasted that long?
Well, there isn't one, as far as I know. There isn't.
No, I can't think of one. I think there was a Coronation Street one for a time.
There was also, I remember back in the day, there was an It's a Knockout exhibition that I remember being really. I can imagine what was in it, but it only lasted a couple of years.
There was just around the corner that was, but I don't know if you remember 1977, there was a Jerry Anderson Space City
Yeah, I remember that.
On the Golden Mile, which was literally just a few buildings away from the Doctor exhibition. Doctor Who opened in 1974. That opened
because
in 1977.
let's be honest, the BBC aren't known for their original ideas, are they?
True. This one was there. So
yeah, it was.
Jerry Anderson's exhibition, Space City, which was in the same building for a couple of years, and then it moved slightly further down towards the Pleasure Beach, and then it ended up at Horton Towers in the early 80s, but it had a strange history to it. Its little novelty factor was rides the space tube to the Space City, and which was literally an escalator.
I remember this. Now you're talking about it.
I still want to go, though.
It was great. I mean, all the original props from Space 1999 and Joe 90 and Thunderbirds. And we have dedicated a couple of pages in the book to it just because it was such an interesting, similar attraction. But
connective tissue there, isn't there?
And I've forgotten that. I'm so pleased that you've reminded me of those memories. I've completely forgotten about that. But it was the travel tube in effect. They tried to recreate the travel tube from Space 1999, didn't they?
But, this is what the book does, I think. Like Alex has said, he wasn't there during those early years. I don't remember the early years as well because I was 6, 7. So we've tapped into a whole generation who's probably just above me in terms of they were, teenagers at the time and adults. So Stuart Glazebrook is one of them. Stuart was a regular visitor, used to dress up all the time as Vok robots and Cybermen. He did some wonderful illustrations and reports for the TARDIS fanzine, and he's given me all the copyright to use all of those in the book, and he sent me through the post the original illustrations, which are just incredible. So they're the best high definition reproductions you're going to see of things like that. And that's just one person, one story. We've tracked down Dr. John Field. Lots of people remember Dr. John as he's affectionately known.
Who's Dr. John Field?
So Dr. John was a mainstay at the exhibition. He was either dressed as the 4th Doctor or later on the 5th Doctor. He drove Bessie to
a living, breathing exhibit then.
He's been doing it for years. He actually worked at the Blackpool Museum that David Boyle opened as well years later. So we've tracked John down. We've tracked others around that time who worked there. And probably our most exclusive interview is with Julie Jones and Bob Richardson, who both worked for BBC Enterprises at the time. Julie was the exhibition's organiser for Longleat and Blackpool, and she's done an incredible job of answering our questions and providing some exclusive photographs, which are just beautiful.
It is lovely that people have responded like that, and you've been able to sort of tap in to other perspectives, a professional perspective from somebody such as this Dr. John Field, who was obviously part of forming Child's memories himself, and of course people who are more in tune with the business angle and the short-term and long-term goals and the kind of the more practical needs of it. For us as children, I think, we were talking a moment ago, weren't we, about smells, never mind sights and sounds, and we're very sort of sensitised at that age, aren't we? Particularly if we've anticipated a visit to somewhere for a very long period of time. You take it all in, and you want to preserve those memories. You go away with a big smile on your face, but you wonder, will I ever go there again? Because 12 months when you're 8 seems like 5 or 10 years when you're an adult. All this research and having and compartmentalising it and things like that. Did you find as you were going along? I mean, how much of it conflicted with what your own memories or assumptions were, John?
There have been moments where people have sent through stories, particularly ones that talk about what it was like behind the scenes. When you find out that these guys got changed just in behind what was the Dalek cave or the Dalek cavern, as people call it. There was a little space there. It wasn't even a room, it was a space. And within that space, apparently, there was an open drain, so it smelled of sewers. And it was full of rotting costumes. There were heads and feet and hands of different costumes and props. And it absolutely stunk, apparently, of rotting latex. So that reading and hearing about those things does take the shine off it, because you think you have this glamorous kind of vision of it. But actually, it was a business at the end of the day. So getting to know stories about who managed it, BBC managed it with alongside the Ritz self-service cafeteria, which was upstairs. So there was a sort of 50-50 partnership within the cafeteria. Dr. John would go and have a free chippy dinner every day. That was part of his contract. So these stories
sounds more like the premise. So this sounds more like the premise from some sort of sitcom that David Lloyd and Jimmy Perry would have written. Sci-fi exhibition Dublin, with a calf and the staff going between the two. I'd watch that. I'd write that, actually.
We need this content.
I mean, it's been really interesting seeing the different perspectives from different people, from people like Bob and Julie. I mean, it was amazing when we first got in touch with Julie, because she said, "Oh, it's a very long time ago. I'm not sure what I'll remember." Then as soon as John started chatting with her about it, the amount of detail she came back with. And clearly you think, okay, this is somebody that's probably not even thought about this for 30 years or more.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the people that visited it. They've got such passionate memories about it, because I guess it was, if you work there, it must have been a lot of hard work, especially if you were normally based in London, having to go to Blackpool and manage all that side of it. You know, to see that the work they did back then, all the people that visited are still thinking about now, all this time later. It is quite phenomenal. And I think also, you know, you look at the different ages, like when I, as I said, I was 7 back in 85, and I was awestruck. It was amazing. Yeah, there's a report by somebody that visited the same year who was probably a teenager, and they were saying, oh, it's terrible, the masks were falling to pieces, all the rest of it. So, you know, it's really, you have a different perspective depending on your age. And like you were saying, a year when you're sort of a young child just seems so long. I mean, we went back to Blackpool in 1988. And I remember looking at the street where the exhibition was, and it was no longer there. And it was like, but it seems so long ago. I'd grown up. I was 10 then, so we think back to the 7-year-old version of it. Like, it felt like a lifetime ago.
And I suppose you're part of it too, Alex. Now, I'm an illustrator and designer as well, and your part of the equation is to take the inspiration from things that John has provided and that people have contributed, and to evoke that and to complement it, and for it all to feel sort of organic and like it's all one whole, but also to be authentic and to recreate that experience, and not to make it look like it was this super slick place, that it did have that kind of make do and mend aspect to it. I'm not going to use words like cheap or naff.
It was as good as they could possibly do it
at
the time with what they had. There's been bigger exhibitions since, probably more slicker presentations in more later years, but for me they haven't had the same atmosphere.
It was strong, wasn't it, Simon? It was
yeah, well,
it grabbed hold of you.
I would agree totally, Alex, because I mean, you know, we've probably all been to the more recent exhibitions in London, where suddenly all the exhibits are now knocked behind glass. They're all immediately there in front of your eyes. So somehow,
the atmosphere is quite sterile as well in comparison.
Very sterile. So somehow it should be much better. It's certainly bigger. It's slicker. It's more impressive. But it literally has got about 10% of the value to me of the old Blackpool and Longleat exhibitions, because as you say, Dan, it's very sterile and very impressive. Don't get me wrong; it's enormously. They've been enormously impressive, but they're lacking.
Missing.
Yeah, it's got atmosphere missing. It's got any feel of quality. It's got any feel of you walk around and you're impressed by it. Whereas even now, if you hadn't been to the Blackpool or Longleat exhibitions previously, but they still existed, if you were to go in now, I cannot imagine how anybody wouldn't be sort of tied up with the atmosphere, with the sound design, with the quality of the display. I feel, and the atmosphere to me is the absolute paramount of all of those. So I feel you would get tied up in it far more than you get tied up in walking around Olympia or a massive aircraft hangar in Cardiff, where there's zero atmosphere whatsoever. And that to me is what's missing.
Yeah, one of my lasting memories is actually the approach to the exhibition. Like you were saying earlier, you walk up the Golden Mile, you've got the sound of the funfair, you've got the pleasure beats, the ghost train sirens, and all these various sort of cacophony of noises, rides and arcades all bleeping away, evolved into sort of a bit of sea and seagulls. And through that, all of a sudden you would hear the music, the theme music, echoing across the air that would get louder and louder as you got towards the location. And that memory of that approach is still very vivid in my mind.
And I'm the same with Longleat, because Longleat was exactly the same, but completely different in that respect of what you're talking about there, Alex, which is that for anybody that went to to go to Longleat, they would remember that the Longleat exhibition was sort of tucked away in a little courtyard, all on its own. And so you would hear from a distance, you would hear occasionally just little snatches of the Who theme drifting from somewhere that you couldn't quite work out where it's coming from. And it took a while to find it. And so literally that voyage of discovery to work down through the back areas of Longleat until you found the exhibition, and then suddenly you turn around a corner and there was the TARDIS. It was just one of the most exciting things in the world. Whereas I walked up to the front of the, as I say, the aircraft hangar in Cardiff. Well, that's it. What can I say more than that? It's sterile. It's impressive. There's a facade there. How can I get excited about a corrugated iron facade? So it's odd that on the one hand, the recent series has brought about this huge change and moved Doctor Who up onto another level of commercialism, where people are literally flooding to the Cardiff exhibition or the London one or whatever. It just is so lacking to me. It's so lacking. It's dead. They're literally just sterile, dead environments.
You were talking earlier on about the fact that lockdown had accelerated the project, John. I mean, lockdown's had a funny effect on a lot of us, isn't it? The weeks have gone into one and even the days. How many hours work do you think has gone into the book all in all?
I'd been collecting things, little snippets of bits of photographs and things like Alex's book, which I found online, for about 20 years. So
I've literally been tucking them away in a folder.
Yeah, absolutely that. So anything, there was a Doctor Who exhibition website, which Hyde Fundraisers bought out, which was around about probably 20 years ago now. And that was the first time I could find anything on the internet that talked about a place I remembered, but I didn't know if other people remembered it as well or as fondly as I did. So just becoming like a little bit of a, catching these nuggets and storing them, magpie, and storing them away, and folders just began to build. So, 2 decades worth of other people's photographs primarily, but obviously with no intent to do anything with them other than just look through them for my own pleasure and to take me back to those happy days. And then coming across Alex and his book, which was a very kind of mini version of what I wanted to create. Alex's books, 5 pages or so, would you say, Alex, on specifically?
Just on Blackpool, yeah, that section was quite small.
And then you think,
memory not being very good about it at the time.
And think what we've done now, we've magnified that almost by 100, haven't we? So it's taken a long time. I mean, what's been the hardest work really has been contacting people of those photographs and saying, look, I'm doing this. Are you willing to give away your memories, your photographs, fully credited?
So sometimes you'd have had the pictures before, and you will have been aware in some cases who'd taken them originally or hosted them online or whatever. And you actually made efforts to contact every single person.
Stuart Glazebrook is a great example because his stuff is all over the internet. If you search for the Blackpool exhibition, you'll probably find one of Stuart's pictures from the 1970s. I hadn't got a clue where Stuart lived, whether he was still around, what he was up to. And he's not on social media, so you can't find him particularly well. But through the process of this book, Stuart now rings me and texts me most days. We've become really close mates. And the same with myself and Alex. I feel like I've known Alex for years. We've been working on this together for just a few months, really. So it's all of those nuggets. The time was right to finally meet someone who could give me a little nudge and go, well, yeah, I think you should do it then. You keep talking about it. You've been thinking about it for a long, long time. This has been the perfect opportunity. I'm on holiday now for the summer holidays. I work in education and so excited to be able to share it, and put it out there in the world and let people have a look at what we've been looking at for weeks and weeks and weeks.
I told Simon about this probably about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and he was, whoa, they're doing what? And I explained to him a little bit more. He said, oh, well, I have to try and get hold of that, definitely. We can find out how it's going to be presented and how much is it going to cost. I said, it's free. He said, free? Yeah, free. So,
I was absolutely stunned on that. I take my hats off to you for putting this together and putting it out there for free because, well, it's incredibly generous for a start off.
It's a labour of love, honestly, and it would, if it wasn't for people saying yes in the first place, yes, have this stuff. Richard Lever's a great example. Alex mentioned the hundreds of photographs that Richard shared. Richard said, those photographs are not for me, they're for the fans. And when you get a response like that, and the community that we built of 70 people, similar, like-minded people going, yeah, absolutely, have these photographs when I was 5 and I'm standing outside the TARDIS with a balloon that's got a Dalek on it.
So you feel that to monetize that would have been morally probably wrong?
The community spirit that we've collected over the course of the project has been incredible, and it's not about making money, it's about making people smile, and it's about making people take them back to a time which, as I keep saying, was such a great period, certainly in my life. A day doesn't go by when I don't think about the place. I've got a room upstairs that's full of memorabilia with exhibition posters on the wall. It's just part of my DNA.
And what I think is lovely about this project that you've done, the way you're describing this now, is it's very much, by the sounds of it, although you two guys have pulled this whole thing together, it's very much a collective, collaborative thing. And what I find fascinating, of course, is that back in the day, I don't know whether everybody has the same experience, but back in the day, you felt like you were the only Doctor Who fan in the world. It was very much an isolated, solo experience, unlike 21st century Doctor Who, that is very much we're all in this together kind of thing. Back in the day, you really did feel like you were the only one. So we all went in and experienced the Blackpool and the Longleat exhibitions, I think, very much in a solo, introverted, introspective way. And so now what's nice about your book is actually everybody suddenly is pouring out their memories that they had, all completely individually. Nowadays, if there was Blackpool and Longleat exhibitions, we'd all be going on sort of Facebook trips there. We'd all be going in groups and things. But back in then, you were on your own, in the dark, listening to that spooky music and weird sound effects. And so to just pour all those out and you guys to, in effect, collate them and pull them all together and thus give a coherent whole to it, I just think is brilliant. That's one of the things I like about the project that you've done, because it's something that couldn't happen back in the 70s and 80s. It just wasn't possible to have that collective experience that you're now bringing to the table. So I just think it's a brilliant idea.
Rewarding to think that this project is the first of its kind. There hasn't been one like it before. It's purely coincidental, I think, like John said earlier, that the Telos book on the exhibition, well, the Telos book covers all the exhibitions. Blackpool's is one of many. But it does feel sort of funny that, okay, these two projects have collided, proving that there is an interest out there for it. There could be a risk that all the memories we get in might all be very samey, or the people might be saying, oh yeah, I remember there was this at there and this at the bottom of the stairs and blah, blah, blah. Where in actual fact, almost every contribution that we've had has put a totally different angle on it. So it's not repetitive at all. You'll hear different accounts of the same things. Again, it's not...
Well, in many ways, of course, JMT famously said the memory cheat, and in many ways he was absolutely right. Interestingly, only recently I was in communication with Richard Molesworth, who is a big fan of the exhibitions, and I was trying to help him to piece together my memories of the Longleat exhibition, of what was where in what year, and I sent him this list of, right, then I know for a fact this is definitely right for this year, and of course then he sent it back and said, well, actually, that's completely wrong, because no, they weren't there. And in my memory, that's exactly where I can remember the sand miner being, where K9 was, so on and so forth, where the giant trap from the Tana's Ruenchain was. And I discovered, actually, it sounds like I'm wrong now. And so this whole thing is very much a voyage of discovery. It's what I'm saying about earlier. It's this very personal experience. Those exhibitions are very personal, almost because they're undocumented. And so if in your book every single person has a different idea of where the sand miner was, it doesn't really matter. If that's where it was in your mind,
your subjective experience is it's still there, and it's completely sort of untarnished. What was the biggest challenge, do you think, Alex, of pulling this all together from your perspective?
I haven't done much of the pulling, but I've done a lot of pushing. I mean, one of the areas that we're still working on is the year-by-year floor plans, because, like I said before, I'd done my own project for 1985. We basically reused my layout, and basically we've been able to populate it with the exhibits from each year, from various fan accounts. We've asked people, what do you think to this? But there's still a few discrepancies, I think. And we're never going to get it completely accurate, because the exhibits changed throughout the year. But I think as a generalisation of what was where each year, we've got it pretty much well covered.
We're expecting it to be probably the most contentious part of the book, to be honest, because we've already said there will be at some point a later revised edition, because once it's out there, people will be responding, actually, no, I remember more. And we've got some gaps too, we've got some gaps in terms of exactly where things were. Certainly in the early years, 74, 75, from about 1981, I started to do my own little sketches as a little kid, writing down what I'd seen. So I know they're pretty accurate, but before that, certainly, throughout the 70s, where things exactly were is a bit debatable, and it has been the hardest bit, but I've handed it over to Alex, so it's all good. Alex is doing that bit.
And funnily enough, I'd had a copy of one of John's floor plans on my hard disk for years before we'd even met.
That's right.
So it was clearly meant to be.
That's it. The stars have aligned. We're going to take a quick break now. If we were at the exhibition, we'd be able to dart over to your uncle's cafe, wouldn't we? And have
chips right now.
Copper and a few rounds of toast or something. Yeah, go for a bag of chips. Yeah, but while we do all that sort of in our minds, you're going to hear about some of the other conversations that are going on across the other shows in the Fandom Podcast Network. Then you can meet us all back here on the Central Pier for more golden miles worth of memories.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to the Fandom Podcast Network and all of the other awesome shows we have to offer. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, our weekly pop culture news podcast. Bloody Kings, our Highlander podcast. Couch Potato Theater, our podcast celebrating our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite pop culture topics. End Zone, the NFL podcast. Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville podcast. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our Doctor Who podcast. Lethal Mullet, a 1980s and 90s action film podcast. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast. And our newest show, Making Treks, a new Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. You can enjoy all of these great Fandom Podcast Network shows on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. Fandom Podcast Network is also on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. You can also find us on Facebook under Fandom Podcast Network. You can also email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter under Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Wow. High energy and something for everybody there. And when you find your next second favourite podcast and want to tell the world, maybe tell the universe, there's merch to match all of that. If you head over to the tpublic.com store and search for the Fandom Podcast Network, we've got a big storefront and you can find all the logos to all of those shows on T-shirts, hats, mugs, and any piece of geek chic you can imagine. Add to cart, add to your life, and support the Fandom Podcast Network into the bargain so everybody wins. Speaking of T-shirts and merch there, the gift shop, as we mentioned earlier on, was the stuff of legend in itself, wasn't it? A tiny booth area. I wouldn't say it was bigger on the inside than the outside. It looked pretty small, whichever side of the partition that you were on, but it was stocked to the brim with official Doctor Who items from back in the day. There was precious little that I can remember. In the surrounding towns where I lived, there was the magazine, or at least at the times when I went, there was the Doctor Who magazine or Doctor Who Weekly Monthly, and there was a few Target books, and that was that. But when you go through the exhibition, or went through the exhibition, and hit upon this site all lit up, stocked full with all this stuff, I never knew where to look first. Simon, do you remember what you bought from your trips? Have you still got any of it now?
Yes, I can remember what I bought from my trips. No, I haven't got any of it now, apart from the stuff that I've rebought at extortionate amounts on eBay to replace, purely because they're such happy memories. Again, my memories come back very much to the Longleat exhibition more so than the Blackpool one, because I can remember once you'd gone through the Longleat exhibition, when you came to the end, the booth was it was minuscule. It was the backside of the ticket booth. So all they had was in effect sort of a glass display case with some target books in and stuff like that. And you literally just ask and say, well, can I have that one there? So I can remember absolutely buying badges, buying pens, buying the two poster magazines that came out that never ever appeared anywhere apart from the exhibitions, as far as I'm aware. It was the only place you could get the Sound Effect LP or Genesis of the Daleks LP. These weren't things that you could go into shops regularly, easily and buy. No. We've talked a lot today about sort of the photos of those old exhibitions. I know whenever I see any old photos of the exhibitions, and you see the photos of both the Blackpool and the Longleat gift shop, and all I'm thinking is, I'd give anything to be able to go back there now and buy those Dennis Fisher canines, those talking Daleks, you name it. It was all there at just normal retail price and in mint, brand new condition. Boy, because that to me is one of the most exciting things, to see those things in brand new mint condition, because you go on eBay and you're not going to see a Dennis Fisher TARDIS in brand new condition. You simply can't do it. But those photos are literally a little spy hole back into history when those products were brand new, fresh from the factory. Wow, that alone takes me back 30, 40 years, and it's so exciting to see.
So there's lots of licensed stuff, obviously, but lots of individual things. Like, as we record this, I'm here wearing a blue and silvery sort of Doctor Who exhibition badge I've got pinned to my shirt for old time's sake, that I bought on my second trip to the exhibition. But this is one of very few items that I've got. I've got this and a pencil, which is sort of half shaved down. By the time I realised I started using it, and then I thought, God, I'm never going to be able to get one of these again. I ought to stop using it, really. So I kept it sort of halfway along. Got a couple of postcards as well. I'll pop some stuff up on the Instagram feed or something, people can see a little. How about you, John? Have you got much from those days or in your...
Yeah, I've got, to be fair, I've got quite a bit. Yeah, I've got the poster mags, so as mentioned. I've got the badges, I've got the pens, the pencils. I've even got a canine and a Dalek necklace. I've never worn them. They did Dalek badges as well. I do remember one occasion, because it was a bit like you knew you were going to Blackpool, you saved your pocket money furiously, because it would be the one place you could spend it and get stuff that you couldn't get anywhere else. I was walking up the exit staircase one day. I'd be probably around 10 or 11. And they were just changing one of the display cases, because that's where they used to put things like the LPs. You could see what BBC records and tapes, goodies were on sale that season. And they were just changing over a display, and it had a black glittery diamond logo T-shirt, which had obviously been just catching the sun from the exit doorway and covered in dust. And the guy took it out and he gave it a little flick, and all the dust went everywhere. He said, "Do you want this for 50p?" And I just thought, wow, that's been on display at the exhibition in Blackpool. I'm definitely having that for 50p. So gave him the money, got it home. My mum saw it. She said, what do you want this dusty old thing for? I'll wash it for you, which she did, and ruins the glittery effect. So I've still got it, but it's nowhere near in the condition it was back in 1979, 1980, whenever it was. So I've got bits.
It's a great story, though, John.
Well, it is a good story. It's in the book. But yeah, I remember replacing it with a neon tube design T-shirt, which we didn't have a school uniform in the 80s, so I used to wear this all the time. Either if it was summer, I'd wear my Doctor Who T-shirt. If it was winter, I'd wear a jumper over the top of it. So it was pretty much,
that was very brave of you back in the day, to wear a Doctor Who T-shirt.
I know. We had to be brave sometimes, didn't we? Because as you were saying before, walking around the exhibition, often on your own, often feeling like the only Doctor Who found in the universe was part of growing up in that particular period. So yeah, I've got a few bits and bobs, and I know Alex has got a couple of things he's kept since his visit.
Between the two visits, I came out with probably quite a lot of stuff. Some fine art castings, figures, some Daleks and TARDIS, possibly the Sound Effects LP, definitely the Space Invaded cassette album.
Remember that well.
Wow.
Yeah, I still got that. Neon tube badge. Can't quite remember. I got a lot of stuff at the same time for Christmases and birthdays and stuff. But from the exhibition, definitely got a series of postcards of Doctor's companions, TARDIS and stuff. One of the target posters of the Dalek anatomy. Got a Dalek pencil case for my mate. So yeah, I came out with bags full of stuff, most of which got given away over time. But the stuff that I've still got from the actual exhibition is definitely the Space Invaded cassette.
What's the Space Invader cassette, just for people out there who don't know what that is?
It was a reissued version of the earlier BBC Space Themes album, which is basically, it's got all the BBC's. You've got Star Trek, Doctor Who, K9 and Company, Tomorrow's World, Hitchhiker's Guide, all the space shows, just all the music from them. And it's an absolutely brilliant album that really encapsulates that era of golden television viewing.
I'd say that's the other thing that I've got. One of my prides and joys in my collection, which I would never sell in a million years, is the 7-inch Peter Davison picture sleeve of the theme tune. From my second visit, Peter Davison had just finished playing the part then. So I remember looking at it and thinking, maybe there's going to be a Colin Baker one further on down the line. But Peter Davison, is very much my Doctor, was how I saw it. So I leapt on that because, Simon said you couldn't find these things anywhere else. I've still got that. But that was from my second visit, which I think was in the summer of 1984. My memories of that was very much kind of like John was saying earlier. That was unfinished business for me. That afternoon, I finally got to sort of go round in full and visit the shop and to take it all in. Because in the 6 years between 1978 and 1984, I'd never really lived this down. I'm going to confess all to you now. In 1978, on that first visit, even though I'd played up to go there, and I've got that really strong memory of, just as Simon described, of turning the corner, seeing the enormous TARDIS. Like I say, I was barely 5 at the time. The TARDIS was huge, and sure enough, it was bigger than the on-screen TARDIS, I believe I now know. And I remember seeing that against what at the time seemed like a bright white sky that was sort of full of seagulls, because heaven knows how small I was. But yeah, I remember approaching with my mother, and I think my granddad was there too, hearing the music and entering. So we actually went in, and I started to go down those stairs, and I turned back to my mother. I could not go in. I was way too scared. So I say I went twice. I entered the premises twice. But the most I saw was all the light, the pulsing light, just as you were describing earlier on, coming out. I think it would have been out of the left-hand side, and hearing that music. And I don't think I took in whatever was in the ceiling. It could have been the spider for all I know. I'll find out when I read your book. You'll probably bring it all back to me. But yes, I was gone. I went straight back to my mother, and that was that. And for 5-6 years, and to be honest, even for several years afterwards, it was a story that was regularly recounted at family Christmases and gatherings and things like that, as I got more and more obsessed with Doctor Who. Because back then I was just somebody who watched it. Eventually, 2 or 3 years later, I became a fan, and it became a bigger part of my life. And it would be, what about that time we took you to the exhibition, but you wouldn't go in? So yes, it took me 6 years to sort of exercise that demon, and I was fighting that story for 20 plus. Simon, you're clutching something there. What have you got?
I just remembered what I have got upstairs. I've just had to run and grab this because I'd forgotten until we were just talking about the shop what I got on this, and I'll put a photo so you can see this. But this is an old Doctor exhibition original carry bag.
Bright silver, pristine.
Beautiful silverware. It's a little bit creased now, but it's about as good condition as I'm going to get. And that's pretty. I'd forgotten I'd got that until we were just talking about it. So it's got the old neon logo on, so I'm reckoning it's from around, it's early 80s basically, isn't it?
It matches my badge. It's the same logo that's on that.
That's the second version. There was a diamond logo version as well. The one I've got says Blackpool at the bottom, so presumably there was a diamond logo Longleat one.
This doesn't say Longleat or Blackpool, so I honestly can't remember which exhibition I got this from. But, happy days.
It'd make a great T-shirt, that would. We'll have to look at doing that. Unofficial, obviously unofficial.
I'd have to frame that. I might get it framed. I have to get it framed and put it up on the wall, really, shouldn't I?
One of the items that I got from the exhibitions, as I mentioned, was the Dalek Anatomy poster, which, as a Dalek obsessive, I was just thrilled to bits with that. Through use, it fell to pieces. I was at a convention back in 2002, and that was where I first met Steve Camden. And I've been in touch with Steve ever since on a regular basis. And he actually sent me a pristine version of that poster, so I was able to add it back to my collection. And Steve's actually written a foreword for the book, and it's the most fantastic piece.
Isn't it wonderful when you hear stories about how generous other fans can be like that, Simon?
Well, I think that's part of Doctor Who, isn't it? I think
so.
Doctor Who fans just generally do go above and beyond, don't we? I don't think there's any fans in the world quite like Doctor Who fans, which is why I get so frustrated when I hear people saying, oh, it's just a TV show, because it isn't just a TV show, it's far more than just a TV show. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here however many years later talking about walking through a dusty old dark corridor with some weird music flying around our heads. Far more than that.
And obviously, if you're listening to this, and we're right at the point now where this book, Blackpool Remembered, is about to be released. But if you are listening to this and you've got your own memories, or maybe your own memorabilia, or some one-offs, or some experiences that perhaps haven't made it into this book, I'm sure the guys would be more than happy to hear from you at some point in the future. Get in touch with them, or get in touch with Type 40, and we'll pass you on to them. So, guys, yes, the book, it's about to escape into the community. Where can people read it? How can they access it? Where do you want us to direct people to, and when, John?
So we've got a Twitter account at the minute, which is at Blackpool7485. But Alex has designed a webpage where it will be the landing site for where people will be able to download it from. So he'll give you the link for that.
And how long has this taken to bring about as well then, Alex? Was this a project in itself? Was it always intended to have its own website and to be delivered in this way?
I think we just discussed earlier on how we're going to get it out there, and that's the way it makes sense for it to have its own site.
You could have done it through social media, couldn't you? But this is nicer somehow. This is legitimacy.
Absolutely, yeah. It deserves its own online home, and people will be able to leave comments. And it'll be interesting to also see, how many downloads it has and that sort of thing. And it's sort of thing that could expand over time. Like if we decide to add a news section or a blog, if we do a second volume, we can put information there. Any video content or any audio content, anything like that, we might be able to add to the site and build it up over time. There's a sort of almost like bonus features to the book, if you like.
Watch this space. Could be just the beginning then.
Well, I'm certainly hoping that you'll come back and you'll do a long lead version of the book.
You're not the first person to say that, Simon.
I was expecting to go white then over this Zoom call that we're recording this.
I understand Longleat was a little bit smaller.
Longleat was a fair bit smaller, perfectly formed, but yes, a fair bit smaller. I would say it was probably about half the floor space in total of Blackpool. So it was a lot less impressive from that point of view. But it seems to have just about the same amount of exhibits in it. I could be wrong on that, but it felt like the same amount of exhibits. But obviously, they were much more crammed into a much smaller space.
It lasted for at least 20 years, didn't it?
Yeah, it was still going right the way through to sort of the mid-late 90s, wasn't it? And I remember I did go to the very, very, very last season of Longleat because it was announced that it was going to be closing, so I knew it was closing. So it was good to be there right at the very end. And it's just an endless feeling of disappointment to me that it's no longer there. And ironically, the saddest thing with Longleat is that the TARDIS, the original TARDIS, is still there, bizarrely, somehow incorporated into this weird bat cave, completely nonsensical.
It just rubs the salt in, doesn't it? Yeah.
It rubs the salt in, the fact that it's there and they've painted it white and Right.
At least with Longleat, they gave you a heads up that it was closing, so you could make that final pilgrimage, because as John was quite rightly said earlier on, come the mid-80s, it was just after the show itself was rested for 18 months, suddenly the doors closed on this first incarnation of the Doctor Who exhibition in Blackpool in late 1985. Now, we don't expect you to give away any of the nuggets, any more of the nuggets that are in your book, John, but was there a reason ever given? Was it as simple as the fact that the show was off the TV?
From the commonalities that I'm hearing from different perspectives is it had run its course. The contract on the actual space was running out. People didn't know it was closing. It literally they had a visit from JNT, Colin Baker, and Nicola all went for Children in Need in 1985. There's some footage of them meeting fans in the basements around the console room. And so that was one of the last events that happened there. The season ended as it normally did, end of October. One guy talks about walking past during the winter and seeing the doors open and thinking, oh, they must be setting up for 1986. So he wandered down and found workmen in there, and they just ripped everything out. There was a skip, apparently. There's a legendary skip that people talk about where a lot of stuff was put. But a lot of the props went on the American tour. So Julie Jones has confirmed that the majority of stuff went on that big truck that toured around America in 1986, 87.
Times do meet up, don't they?
Yeah. We do have a letter which one of the people who volunteered at the time wrote to Julie Jones asking her what was going on, and she just basically wrote back in January 1986 saying, we're confirming that the exhibition is now closed. So very little sort of official information and reasons why, but we do know that it was something to do with the lease on the building.
So it could have been tied to that business that was upstairs. It could have been tied to any one of a number of things rather than the simple fact that the show had been sort of kind of cancelled but not. I don't think I heard about it for at least 2 years. I think it was around the time Sylvester McCoy was in the role. I assumed it was still open. I went back on another family trip to Blackpool and found that it wasn't there. Well, I was never entirely sure where it was, so but I went looking and I know I couldn't find it. I don't think I was even able to narrow it down to where it used to be. Obviously, the passage of time after 2-3 years in my own memory, so it just slipped away.
Do we know if anything sort of survived? I mean, I know that the original console is out there somewhere, isn't there? Somebody owns the original console, and I've seen that one.
So Peter Trott owned it for a while, and he's contributed to the book. Peter's got one of the original Longleat Daleks, and he's been really useful in sort of putting some bits together about where things are now. And Neil Cole has done a wonderful job at writing a piece for us. In particular, he talks about the Garm exhibits that he now owns for his museum.
That's Neil Cole, of course. He's a friend of the show and owner of the Museum of Classic Sci-Fi, isn't he, Simon? A very old friend of yours.
Yeah, we go back 30 odd years, and of course Neil is coming up to just reopening his museum on October the 24th. It's due to be opened in grand style by ace actress Sophie Aldred. You absolutely must go because it's as close as you're going to get to the old style of the Blackpool and Longleat exhibitions.
Yeah, Neil is definitely keeping the flame burning, because it is a sad state of affairs now. The Doctor Who experience closed 2 or 3 years ago, so there's no official Doctor Who exhibition anywhere in the country. Unimaginable. It was probably unimaginable 6 or 7 years ago, but there was a second version of the Doctor Who exhibition in Blackpool. Of course, it's probably a story for another time, but could a version 3 happen, Alex? Is it time the Daleks roll back into Blackpool again?
Absolutely, yeah. It always felt like a spiritual home for the show for me.
I think so.
Even though he hasn't been there for some time, it just seemed right when David Boyle's museum arrived. So it was great seeing it through adult eyes, if you like. And he did a good job of recreating a similar kind of atmosphere.
Fans making up for the BBC shortcomings again. That's how I.
Yeah, I mean, it was very sad to see when it closed to see all the props auctioned off and go to various private collections. Because then you just know that there's a likelihood that they'll never be exhibited again, maybe. Who knows? People like Neil have come across things. I mean, he's currently restoring Mestor from the Twin Dilemma.
Yes, he's in the process of Mestor and Mordred, the Mordred costume as well. And as far as I know, that's the only place, Neil's exhibition now is the only place that you can see any of those original props open to the public, because everything else, tragically, is now behind closed collectors' doors, which I just find heartbreaking and a terrible thing. And if I could do anything, I'd go back in time and just stop that happening, because it just seems such a shame that these people have got these original props and we will never, ever, ever see them again. And that just breaks my heart.
It's also something to realise, as we've discovered along the way, that so many things were just trashed. When you look at props like the glass incubating Dalek or the destroyed Dalek that were in the cave, they were the only time those props were ever publicly displayed. And then the odds are they were probably skipped because they've never been seen since. Same with the animated Dalek brain that used to live on the wall. I had a conversation with another fan who managed to salvage from the skip, I think, an Earthshock spaceship. And when he went to uni, his mum threw it away.
Another hero then, and then snatched away from the jaws of victory. Yeah, I mean, good old Neil for doing this. We're going to have to get Neil back in soon because, he's making an exhibition of himself most weeks, isn't he, on social media? So he won't mind coming back on. I'm sure he'll talk our heads off. Guys, I was captivated the moment I heard about this project. I can't wait to see it roll out, and we'll do everything that we can to support it, to continue to publicise it, to continue to talk about it. It's been a pleasure to chat to you both today. Maybe we'll get together at some point in the future to talk about any secret projects that may or may not happen. But for now, John Collier and Alex Storer, thank you. I'll be back, of course, with some more Type 40. Pretty soon, you can look out for that materialising wherever you found this. It could have been over on Apple Podcasts. Simply search for the Fandom Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts. And if you're already there, maybe drop us a review, just so new listeners can find us that bit easier. It does help more than you think. We're also over on iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play, the Podbean app, and Spotify. Wonderful Spotify. I love it. So easy to use. We're so easy to find. Search the Fandom Podcast Network there and you'll see all our listings. Anything you want to say to us direct, you can do so if you email type40doctorwho@gmail.com, Twitter and Instagram @type40doctorwho. There's our Facebook page and that Type 40 Facebook group for real-time, extra-dimensional chit-chat that you can come and have. And I can be found scattered throughout all of space and time, but mostly on Twitter as the Spacebook, where I talk about, well, anything really geeky that catches my eye, my imagination, or both in popular culture, inside or outside of the TARDIS. Simon, you're the original Lunatic, as we established earlier on, but they are others, aren't they? Where can people find you and connect with them on social media?
Absolutely, they can come and find us on Facebook. Just look for Doctor Who, the Lunatics, and you will find us there. Come and join in the fun there.
Step into the world of the Lunatics. Alex, you've got an online portfolio, haven't you? Where can people connect with you and see some of that and hear some more?
If you go to thelightdream.net, that's where you'll find a hub of all my science fiction art. And thelightdreams.bandcamp.com is my music project. For many years, I used to run a Who fan site called 70.net, which I rarely update these days, but it's still online. And I'm obviously going to be putting details about the book on there as well. And if you're on Twitter, then I'm at The Light Dreams.
John, as you say, the time is near. Remind us, where can we find and see the end result? And where can people connect with you and hear more from you?
So if you follow us on Twitter, it's at Blackpool7485. And there's links there that will be released on the 28th of August, directly to the book. The website address, have you got that, Alex, the website address?
Yep, the website address is going to be Blackpool Remembered 7485.wordpress.com.
There you go, and that'll be in the show notes too. Don't miss it. Get in touch with the boys here. Let them know what you think. Please, please, please support this project. It's very, very worthwhile. It's bound to, even if you weren't at the time, transport you back in time to the 70s and the 80s, all rolled into one. 300 pages worth. Thanks again, everybody, and thanks to you for listening. Join us again next time here on the Fandom Podcast Network for another episode of Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast where we always have the time if you have the space.